1920 from the base college of art. The drawing was a gift from Chris Huntington, the painter, and his wife Charlotte McGill. Thanks to them, they started something called the Carl Springhorn Appreciation Society. Thanks to them, we know a lot more about his life and art. And you can find the society online. A lot of their papers and transcriptions of letters and things like that are available, easily available. When Todd Watts was printing some of the glass plate slides from the Monson Historical Society's collection of Cy Wilkins and Frank Sherburne photographs, he was amazed to find this portrait of Springhorn. We believe it was made around 1911, 1912, around the time the painter first arrived in Monson. He was, as you can see, a fashionista of the North Woods. The photographer Leon Cy Elliott Wilkins took over Sherburne's photography studio in Monson after the latter's death in 1910. And I love this. In addition to being a photographer, Wilkins played several instruments, including fiddle and mandolin. He also was a merchant in dry goods, ran a shoe store in Portland, and was a machinist at the slate quarry. So, there you have it. This is not quite Monson Gothic, but pretty close. The posture, the lighting, the stiffness as at a funeral, it's all there. And I was looking at it the other day, I said, I think I could see some of Glenn Poole in the features there. Frank Sherburne took this photo of Thomas Jones Poole and Mary Jane Murphy in 1893. He used the glass plate negatives from the Stanley brothers, the famous inventors from Kingfield, Maine. Interesting note from Sherburne's obituary, he died in his cabin at Indian Point one night after rowing 1.5 miles up Lake Heber. That's the way to go. This photograph of two beguiling couples is among Sherburne's most memorable portraits. Note how each of the four faces is pointed in a different direction, paradoxically adding a kind of symmetry to the image. Each pose is quite different. The disposition of the hands casual yet fixed. The outfit similar but not quite matching. There's a sense of propriety here, but also, I would say, possible impropriety. The hat on the woman on the left and the man in the back's hairstyle, I think, speak of free spirits. One of the most important events in the life of Monson occurred in 1870 with the discovery of slate by William G. Jones, a Welsh immigrant from the slate mining country of Wales. Between the years of 1870 and 1890, the Welsh, the Swedish, Finnish, and Canadian immigrants arrived. They brought up the deserted farms, found work at the quarries, and opened businesses on Main Street. A seam of slate runs through the bicentennial show, starting with this photo by Cy Wilkins of the Monson Palm Quarry, taken around 1920. It's a vertiginous view and not something for folks who suffer from claustrophobia. There's something otherworldly about the mine with its cut walls and its, well, slate gray atmosphere. The image signals success. Slate was king, but also the treacherous life of miners. And I just wanted to show you a detail of that photograph. This is the detail that shows you really have to look for them. There are a group of three men down at the very bottom there. So in the large photo, they're way, 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 way down there, and almost like Playmobil figures. And talk about scale and what you might call depth perception. Slate was used to create a wide range of objects, including such novelty items as this cribbage board and nut and bolt. I love how Todd Watts made them levitate in this photograph for the exhibition catalog. The last item to be included in the show was a slate clock. The artistry in all these objects is really, really remarkable. And I did want to mention folks to go see the pop-up show of these remarkable slate cutouts by Emil Carson that are on view next door. Those were latecomers, but they made a nice space for them. Geraldine Jerry Weymouth painted this oil on canvas, miners being lowered into slate quarry around 1970. As noted in Monson, Maine History, 1822-1997, and I just wanted to show this book because I used it quite a bit in preparing the catalog. essay. The quote, "The men were lowered down into the slate mine via a wooden box by the operator in the Hoister house." Weymouth, who attended Abbott High School, had no formal art education, but she enrolled in the famous artist school, a popular correspondence program. She painted various scenes in and around Monson, where she lived, and raised a family. And I love this little anecdote about her from Betty Holmbaum Belmont, who said, "Weymouth certainly was a gifted artist and lovely person. I remember Cliff, her husband, taking her to places to paint because she did not drive. He waited in the car." And there's a close-up of the painting showing the 5 miners ready to make their descent. According to Jerry Weymouth's son, the painting was a tribute to honor the death of Doc Holman's husband, who was killed in an accident in the quarry. And then I kept looking at this. It reminded me so much of say, the social realist painters of the early part of the 20th century. You know, kind of empathy and yet very forthright in showing the conditions and what their situation was. Another Weymouth painting, this one depicts the Olson family slate house on Tenney Hill, which was replaced in 1990 by the Lake Hebron Heights Senior Citizens Apartments. Those are Borstone and Barren Mountains in the background. It's a wonderful winter landscape. I wanted to thank Alan for bringing it to our attention for the show. I did want to mention that I leaned heavily on Alan and Glenn and Todd and others in selecting the work that's in the show. Remnants of quarrying appear in several Alan Bray paintings, including this 1994 KC-Non panel painting, Ruined Monument. The painting features the vestiges of an improvised monument the painter and his brothers constructed atop a mound of slate the day their father, George Bray, was buried. Born in Waterville, Bray grew up in Monson and now lives in Sangerville. From an early age, he immersed himself in the landscape, developing, in Dennis Gilbert's words, sensitivities to the relationships between the living and the ancient land on which life depends. He has contributed to the local art scene through various activities, including bringing artists to the Borstone Mountain Audubon Sanctuary and teaching workshops more recently for Monson Arts. And here's another Bray painting of the subject, Slate Tailings, 1999, from the Farnsworth Art Museum. We tried to borrow this painting for the show, but the museum turned us down. Bray is always on the lookout for changes in the landscape, phenomena that may inspire one of his paintings. Here, trees infiltrating a mound of slate tailings is such a scene. The image is stunning in both its precision and its imagination. Sculptor Celeste Roberge was in the first cohort of Monson Arts residents in 2018. She had been to Monson before in November 2001, at which time she explored the quarries, which piqued her geological artistic interest. She writes, "The slate quarry is a fragmented universe of impossible angles, dizzying depths, chaotic heaps of shards, haunted by the remains of lives reflected in dark pools." This sculpture, Monson Polyhedron, required a good deal of local knowledge and engineering to create. Alan Bray guided Roberge into the quarries. John Wentworth and his son Matthew figured out how the polyhedron could be fabricated in wood. And Wendy Russell at Sheldon Slate laser cut photographs onto repurposed slate roofing tiles. And then Sheldon Slate's owner, John Tatko, writes Roberge, lent his, quote, keen eye, generous snacks, and patience with my intrusion into his industrial space. It takes a Monson village. Roberge's sculpture is based on an object that appears in the German artist Albrecht Dürer's 1514 engraving, Melancholia #1. This is a print with a close-up of the polyhedron. To this day, this quote-unquote crazy cube has defied art historians and others to explain exactly what it signifies. There's a great article I just came across the other day by Gunter Ziegler in The Guardian that recounts the attempts to uncover the mystery. And I've got to share this. Of the 5 theories he shares, his favorite comes from the US mathematician and artist George Hart, On Durer's polyhedron, Hart notes, one might speculate that the cube represents masculinity, and truncating one in an upright position may have some Freudian symbolism. Whatever you say. Whatever you say. Let's time jump again to the turn of the 19th century painter Seth Wyman Stewart. This is one of many landscapes he painted in his home region of Lake Hebron around 1900. Born and raised in Monson, the ninth of 10 children, he grew up on Seven Pines Farm in the southeast part of town. He served with the Union Army. According to the Maine Memory Network, he trained as a painter with a Mr. Cameron, a California artist who summered at Mount Kineo. It would be great to find out more about him. I would love to know what that connection was. The self-described painter, decorator, and artist in oil also hung paper and painted carriages. Hung paper might be wallpaper, I'm thinking. I'm not sure what that was. His views of Lake Hebron, Moosehead Lake, Mount Kineo, Little Wilson Stream, and other scenic landmarks were popular among affluent visitors to the region. This is one of the most unusual pieces in the show. Stewart's portrait of the hermit Trustum Brown, painted in 1899. As Monson Historical Society director Glenn Poole tells it, Dr. Brown was born in Harmony, Maine. He tragically lost his wife and children to disease. After remarrying, he lost his second wife and retreated to the woods in 1874 to become a hermit, living along Long Pond Stream in Elliotsville, over a mile from his nearest neighbors, the Bodfish family. He called himself Mediator Brown and claimed to be able to talk to the spirits, some of which you can see their faces up in the upper corners of the painting. Though a hermit, Glenn writes, he was a dapper dresser and often walked into town. He died in 1912, and remnants of the Brown place can still be seen near the Appalachian Trail. It's really quite an amazing story. That would be worth another, some deeper dive into it. I'm looking at Andrew. Stewart and his son Walter Leon Stewart catered to visiting sportsmen in their work, including this painted paddle by Seth, which shows the moose and the gun, and the handsome brook trout by his son Walter. They showed their work at trade fairs in the East, including the Boston Sportsman's Show. Father and son also painted scenic views of the region on slate. And I've been telling folks I did my first paddle of the Allagash in June, and I caught my first rookie. So I just took a while. The last week there. The book Monson, Maine History, 1822-1997, highlights two artists among its most notable citizens, the aforementioned Seth Stewart and photographer Bernice Abbott. Born in Springfield, Ohio, Abbott briefly attended Ohio State before moving to New York City to study sculpture and painting. Later in Paris, she assisted photographer Man Ray in his studio before embarking on her own amazing journey to becoming a brilliant camera artist, famed for her portraits of avant-garde literary figures like James Joyce and Jean Cocteau, studies of New York City architecture, and some wonderful pioneering scientific photographs. I just went up before lunch to the library to check out them. They have a little collection of them up there, and they're amazing. And I finally kind of suddenly made the connection between Todd and Bernice aesthetically. Check it out at the Monson Public Library. Abbott first came to Maine in the 1950s while documenting the length of US Route 1. Her book, Portrait of Maine, 1968, on which she collaborated with the writer and artist Chenoweth Hall, features documentary images of her adopted state. She eventually bought a home in Blanchard, leaving New York for health reasons, and lived out her life there and in Monson, sustained by the community and her international fame. And one little item I found going through the research was that Abbott was the 21st recipient of Monson's Boston Post cane, given annually to the oldest citizen in town. It was pretty amazing. Todd made this formal portrait of Abbott in 1981. I just think it's haunting. By contrast, George Daniel, who lived in Trenton, Maine, photographed Abbott in a more impromptu pose studying a slide in her cabin in Monson. In an interview toward the end of his life, Daniel recalled how he and his partner, Steve Dorland, would visit Abbott for an overnight. We'd drink with her and dance with her. She loved to dance. Love that picture. This is Abbott's 1954 photograph of Milliken's General Store, a roadside establishment in Bridgewater in Aroostook County. And I don't know, in discussion with folks, I don't know that she did any photos of the Monson area, per se. We didn't see any. By its signs, you can see that the store offered clothing, shoes, groceries and feeds, and Salada tea. It epitomizes Abbott's eye for Maine life, and I wanted to thank Todd for lending it to the show. One of my goals for the exhibition was to give a sense of Monson's Main Street. Here is Jerry Davis rendering a Fool's Market from around 1965 with the Swedish Lutheran Church on Wilkins and Heaton Streets, built by Swedish immigrants in 1890. The market was operated from 1955 to 1985 by Cookie and Bernie Poole. And here is Poole's Market today, the Monson General Store, revived by Monson Arts and painted by Milton Christensen last year. Christensen captures the liveliness of the place, a hub of community life. And I wanted to mention that he set up a little pop-up show across the street if you get a chance to see some of his recent paintings. They're wonderful. And here is Alan Gray's Monson Post Office from 1978, a casing on panel. The painting is wonderfully stylized and almost surreal. In the catalog for the show, I offer the following account of the post office way back when from the history of Monson. In the year 1824 or 1825, the post office in Monson was established. Before this, all the mail matter designated for this place stopped in Sangerville, and the inhabitants were obliged to go 12 miles to mail or to receive a letter or paper. Frederick F. Gates was the first postmaster, and Hiram Dowdy the first mail carrier. Mr. D was succeeded in a short time by Benjamin Stanchfield, who every Saturday for 2 years went on foot to Esquire Kelsey's in Guilford, returning in the same day with the mail and being obliged to cross the Piscataquis River twice each way in the best manner he could, for there was no bridge, in order to leave the mail at the post office in Abbott. For this service, the government paid these men 2 shillings a trip, or a little more than 1 cent for each mile of travel. They usually had some errands to do for the inhabitants, for which they received some trifling compensation. As they approached the post office, and sometimes as they passed the houses, this I love, they sounded a trumpet before them to inform the people that the mail was coming, and that there was an opportunity for anyone who wished to send errands. Good to see them. And to think we complain about the post office. You know? Here is John Bosen's painting Canal 2010 of the same subject, same scene as in Alan's painting. I love the wonderful light and the color and the simple geometry of the painting. Traditionally trained at Kent State and the Mass College of Art, Bosen did not paint every day until he retired in 2010, when his great uncle Conrad Van Heining moved to Willimantic, one town over from Monson in the 1950s. Bosen and his family began visiting him. The painter moved to Monson in 1974 and owns and manages his wonderful gallery across the way. And I was there earlier today, and there's some really outstanding new work. You should hop over there and check it out. And one more post office painting, this one by Mary June Edsel. She captures the bustle of downtown Monson. There is so much to admire in this painting, 1981 painting, from the reflections in the windows to the clothing of the passersby. I don't know if you could see that, but there's just it's a wonderful specificity there. Born in the suburbs of Chicago, Edsel took classes at the Art Institute of Chicago and later studied art at Manchester College in Indiana. Following graduation, she taught art and English at schools in Indianapolis. She met Ralph Edsel, a prominent lawyer from Long Island, New York, in Florida in 1978 and married him in 1981. And on their way home from a vacation in Canada one year, They stopped in Monson and bought a house where they lived seasonally until Mr. Edsel died in 1982. She sold the house in 1983 and lived in Sarasota until 2014, when she moved to Cincinnati. One of the special pleasures of organizing the Bicentennial Show was being able to speak with several of the artists who had more or less fallen off the Monson radar. I had just an incredible conversation with June Edsel. I mean, she just went back in time. I think she's at 90 now, 90, 91. Edsel's residency in Monson was short, 3 or 4 summers, but it was a time of great creativity. With a lively brush, she painted various scenes around town, including the Wentworth house with its bright red flower beds. Many of her memories of the town, which she shared with me, involved community, a corn chowder supper, meeting through hikers at the laundromat, stacks of camp wood for sale on the side of the road. All of it fed her passion for the place. Watercolorist W. Parker Hall spent his early years in Monson before setting out to see the world. He studied at the Portland School of Art. Early in his career, he taught at the Governor Baxter School for the Deaf. He has painted up and down the Maine coast, inland around Carrabassett Valley and Greenville, and in the Caribbean, where he lives today, and he does boat lettering and graphics. Among his Monson area subjects is the Lake Hebron Hotel, built by the Monson Maine Slate Company in 1882, and which burned down in 1910. The hotel had 20 rooms with an annex added later for the staff. This watercolor dates from the late 1950s. Moving on, John Wentworth is part of a multi-generational furniture business established by his grandfather in 1947. Quote, "I grew up going to the factory when I was 6 years old with my father on weekends and evenings, smelling wood, seeing how everything was done," he told an interviewer. "It's kind of been in my blood." A 1973 Colby College graduate, Wentworth worked at Moosehead Manufacturing from 1981 to 2007, the last 6 years as president. In 2010, he opened John Wentworth Custom Furniture, where he designs and creates a wide variety of furnishings, including firewood boxes, tables, cabinetry, and his signature stumps and trunks. Wentworth creates his furniture from maple, ash, pine, and other woods, the logs sometimes sourced from a local sawmill. He wonders at these materials, their age and beauty, and is humbled by the opportunity to extend a tree's life through the furnishings he designs, creates, or restores. In 2001, Gemma Gascoigne made her way from England to Monson. I think she's the one who's from furthest away in the show, where she set herself up as a potter. She had earned an art history degree at the University of Leeds and a post-grad diploma in arts management at Roehampton Institute, eventually working for the Arts Council of England. At age 26, she saw an ad for pottery classes at Pimlico Pottery Studio. She subsequently studied with Barry Guppy, a master potter, for 2 years, after which she moved to Maine, bought a potter's wheel and a kiln, and set up a studio in Blanchard. She began selling work in 2001 and helped launch Lake Hebron Artisans, an arts and crafts cooperative. Gascoigne likes to explore shapes and experiment with glazes, as witness these pieces that are in the show. Gascoigne's studio and shop, Monson Pottery, which opened in 2015, is a hub of activity, offering workshops and exhibitions, as well as a showcase for her own work. She adds to the Monson art scene through her second-floor gallery, where she has shown artists from the region, including the fresco painter Barbara Sullivan from South Sullivan. This is one of her delightful wall works. And here I just wanted to share, this is the lineup for the show that's opening later today at 5. An incredible show. I stopped in to see it earlier, focusing on photographers, including Todd Watson and Berenice Abbott. And actually, I wanted to mention too, in the show, there's a wonderful portrait of, I can't remember the artist, but it's a portrait of Lulu from the restaurant, dressed in a cowboy outfit. It's just
that's end up.
Fantastic.
And the Burke is the photographer.
Thank you. And here, every piece of wood tells a story, John Wentworth has said, an observation echoed by his fellow Monson craftsman, Ed Hoovler. Originally from Indiana, Hoovler started out as a carpenter and ended up making bowls. Nothing fancy, he says, just well-made, usable wooden bowls made from local trees. His materials include various hardwood, yellow and white birch, beech, black cherry, hornbeam, maple, crabapple, walnut, oak, with most of his bowls made to order. This is the three that are in the show. Hoofler made a special series of bowls to mark the bicentennial. This is the bottom of the one that my wife and I purchased back in May. The bicentennial art exhibition features images related to several of the icons Hoofler includes here, among them the railroad, the Appalachian Trail, Lake Huron, the church, the snow roller, and the quarry, each subject meaningful to the history of the town. While best known as a country singer, he was inducted into the Maine Country Music Hall of Fame. Raymond Yodelin Slim Clark also flourished as a painter of Maine woodland scenes and wildlife, as well as images of the old days, including Monson's narrow gauge railroad. He once wrote, "Painting is like singing. You have to know what you are singing about or painting about in order to do a good job of it." I couldn't agree more. It's like a beautiful bit of wisdom. I wanted to mention that two of the steam locomotives at the Maine Narrow Gauge Museum in Portland are from Monson. Monson's railroad was the last of 5 narrow gauge railroads in Maine to close. It was the shortest of them all. One of Monson's main claims to fame has been that it serves as a gateway to the Appalachian Trail. As painter Milton Christensen observes, because Monson is a waypoint on the Appalachian Trail, it has a more cosmopolitan feel than some of the other central Maine towns. He likes the fact that you never know who you might meet in Monson. And this is a trail marker from around 1965 for the trail. Monson native James William Holmbaum found the local landscape to his liking. At times he took liberties with the view, enhancing the scene in both composition and color. His study here of a sunken stump encircled by water lilies at the far end of Lake Huron highlights his impressionistic approach. According to Monson historians, on February 8th, 1975, the Monson Historical Society sponsored the first Snow Roller Day. Snow Roller Day has been held several times in the last 25 years by other town organizations. Note, this is from the history, there are only 4 snow rollers left in Maine. Snow rollers roll the snow in the roadways to make traveling easier for the horse-drawn sleighs and sleds. This is John Bosen's Snow Roller Day 2010. And I want to mention, I was up at the library earlier today, and there's a wonderful snow roller model up there that is really wonderful. I wanted to include some of Monson's wildlife, hence this painting by Edwin Worry. Finnish descent, Worry was born in Monson, served in the Army during World War II, and landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, and received 4 Bronze Service Stars. He worked for the state of Maine Department of Inland Fisheries as a game warden for 21 years before retiring in 1971. In his long career as a game warden, Worry spent a lot of time in the woods around Monson. He had a chance to observe animals, including a black bear, seen here on the cliffs above Big Wilson Stream in the 100-mile wilderness in Elliottsville. And then I wanted to do a little special Warstone Mountain shout out the next couple of slides. The mountain has been a favorite subject of painters in the region over the years and deserves a special spotlight, beginning with Alan Bray's Warstone from Ottawa, a case scene from 1993. And I just wanted, this is nice, something that I found. Here's Bray writing about his process of painting. I take a great deal of time to make a painting, but it is an essential part of letting the idea take a turn or two that I hadn't considered, and finding the kind of marks that will get me there. There is nothing rote or mechanical about the search for patterns in the phenomena I choose to examine. At times, they might seem random, but random is just a concept that admits to the limits of our understanding, so the search continues and the marks pile up. Alan Gray. Borestone Mountain Audubon Sanctuary's phenomenal suite of views provided Lindsay Hancock with rich material for paintings. She first arrived there in 2004 as a guest at the lodge and then returned as a Maine Audubon volunteer to bring other artists to partake of the grandeur. This is her painting, A View from Peregrine Ridge from 2021, which incorporates memories of earlier times and a more recent visit to refresh her perspective overlooking the Sunrise, Middle, and Sunset ponds. Hancock writes, "It is just one of many perches we are invited to approach, reflect on, and as artists capture the light or the forms or the lines in a medium that makes a lifelong impression." I reached out to a couple of artists, other artists who spent time there, and got a few things from them. In the years 2003, 2008, Hancock helped organize artist retreats at the sanctuary. This is a 2008 acrylic painting by Philip Fry, a wonderful painter who lives and paints in Sullivan, Maine. This is his Midday Pond Borestone Ode to Alan Bray from 2008, an acrylic painting. About this mixed media piece, Decoy Daydream at Borestone Mountain from 2007, artist Rebecca Goodale offers this account. "There was a decoy then. It was partially submerged in front of the dining room of the lodge. The bugs were so bad that week that if it hadn't been for my own total submersion in the pond, I might not have survived the blood loss and toxins." And fellow painter Nina Jerome had an extra screen mesh shirt and full face covering hood. "I was climbing Katahdin 2 weeks later, and in preparation I spent every day after lunch hiking. I wore that screen shirt everywhere, except in the pond. I made 3 daydreams that week. This is daydream number 3. And I just saw Rebecca this morning. She just finished doing a workshop for Monson Arts. Just a wonderful, wonderful artist. Ed Hoovler credits the arrival of Monson Arts in 2018 with raising awareness of local artists and artisans. Indeed, with the residency's establishment, a new chapter in the cultural history of the town began with gusto. Seemingly overnight, artists and writers from across the country and around the world came calling and became part of a bustling community. The arts were building the community the way Slate once had. With the Lieber Foundation's financial support and the leadership of Stuart Kestenbaum, Dan Buteau, and Chantal Harris, and others, the program has grown and thrived despite the pandemic. I wanted to highlight a couple of artist residents, starting with Sarah Farragher. Farragher had a relationship with the area before her Monson Arts stay in 2020. She and her late husband, Ryan King, bought land and planned to build a replica of Thoreau's cabin at Walden Pond as, quote, a tiny hiking painting retreat. They also helped maintain a section of the Appalachian Trail. For someone who had focused much of her painting on the Maine coast, in Monson, Farragher found another ocean, she says, of trees, and relished studying how water moves through and shapes the inland landscape. She says, to be outdoors all day, painting beside or in while sitting on a flat rock, a fast-flowing stream or river, well, it's sublime. This is her fall view under the bridge, Barrows Falls, Monson, Maine, 2018. And I want to recommend a book that she just published, a memoir this last year called Autobiography of an Island, about her time on Bear Island in Penobscot Bay. It's a wonderful book. Photographer Talasa Raj came to Monson as part of a pre-COVID cohort in March 2019. Then teaching at Colby College and now at the University of Iowa, Raj had a specific project to focus on while she was here, a book about Everard Hall, one of the last traditional grave diggers in Maine. It's one of her photos. To help break the tedium of editing and managing files for that project, Rosh collaborated with fellow Monson Arts resident Francisco Vasquez Murillo, an artist from Argentina, on an outdoor experiential work. With an overabundance of snow, the two created a large sculpture in a nearby farm field using an excavator loaned by a local construction company. Monumento is the central Maine equivalent of an Incan temple. Jewelry designer and painter J.E. Paderak, who co-manages Zero Station, a gallery and frame shop in Portland, arrived in Monson in mid-August 2020, determined to, in her words, rebuild a career that for various reasons had been put on hold. She worked on a series of plant portraits begun in 2019, each one meant to honor an individual specimen, mainly roadside weeds, as, quote, a sentient being. This is Paderak working in her studio at Monson Arts, a photo by Danielle Cleves. Paderak ended up completing around 30 pieces. She began exhibiting her work again at the Turtle Gallery on Deer Isle and sold several works from her residency. One plant portrait was juried into the exhibition Flora at Gallery 263 in Cambridge. As she had hoped, her career got a kickstart thanks to her time in Monson. This is her faith in a seed after Thoreau, gouache, and graphite. And then one more resident, Rockland photographer Chelsea Ellis, spent the month of October 2021 working with photographer Todd Watts at his studio in Blanchard. Here she is shown looking over proofs in his studio. This is a photo by Sam Giberson. Ellis relished the uninterrupted time to work on her abstract figures. It was honestly a little jarring going from creating art around my day job schedule to having so much freedom, she noted. She also had access to an Epson P9000 for printing 30 by 40 inch images, much larger than what she had previously printed on her own. Now this is one of her pieces from her Fragment series, 2021, and actually this piece is in the show that's opening at 5 at Monson Pottery. Monson Arts is dedicated to sharing its resources with surrounding communities and schools. The high school art and writing program launched in the 2019-2020 school year. A group of 25 young artists and writers from 6 areas high schools spent 2 full days each month at Monson Arts working with painter Alan Bray and the poet Dawn Potter. The students also met and mingled with resident artists and writers. This is a photo by Stu Kessenbaum, a photo of one of Dawn Potter's workshops. That's her on the right talking with the students. I always like to include a poem in my presentations. I asked Dawn for one of hers, and she wrote, "I have lots of central Maine poems that do not mention Monson specifically, but were written in and around Piscataquis and Somerset counties. In my new book, Accidental Hymn, which I highly recommend, there's the poem La Terre Perdue, for instance, which is set in the Maine woods. And I'd like to read that poem. La Terre Perdue, the lost earth. Back in my country, we hardly knew what a sunset was. The trees were so dense, weighted with lichen and thyme. At evening, the shadows of the pines, the firs, the tamaracks would crowd the heavens. And on a summer night, the sky would sink into a blue so black it was the wet ink of fountain pens. It was old work shirts forgotten in the rain. And now a lemony streak of light would finger each giant's shadow, and the daybirds would cry out their last words, their last words. And now silence, and now the owl would begin to speak." Just a brilliant poem. Todd Watts began his career as a photographer after graduating from the School of Visual Arts in New York City in 1971. His first major project was documenting the construction of the World Trade Center. Over time, his photography changed from documentary to personal and inventive responses to the world at large. In the mid-1970s, he began to print Bernice Abbott's photographs, a project that brought him to Blanchard, where she lived at the time. In the late 1990s, after her death, Watts relocated his studio from New York to Blanchard, where he has lived ever since. In 2021, the Monson Arts established the Abbott Watts Residency for Photography. This is Todd's Blanchard Weather Report, 10/16/2016. He has written, "Artworks are new to nature, and in the Blanchard Weather Report, I am adopting nature. There are no people in these pictures. There is no need because their presence is implied. In art, our presence is always implied. As we look at pictures, we become complicit in their making, as we are in every artwork ever made." And here is his Blanchard Weather Report, 5/27/2015. And again, Watts reflecting on this series. "My pictures do not capture a moment. They are photographs, but they do not depict a particular event. When I make my pictures, I speak to them, often out loud, and they speak back quietly. The work is completed when, like in any conversation, the subject changes. The conversation remains encapsulated in the work to be continued by myself or anyone else, after lunch perhaps, or during a long flight to Paris, or at this moment." And finally, this is Watts's Perfidy #1, part of a 4-part series he created in 2010. Writing about this piece in Down East, Edgar Allan Beam noted that Watts had used Caro syrup to paint flowing images of the destruction of nature by human development, photographed the results, and then printed them in garish hues of pink, orange, aqua, and blue. Perfidy was inspired by the huge Plum Creek development project around Moosehead Lake, so maybe Maine does creep into Watts's feverishly imaginative work after all. And I had to look it up. Perfidy means deceitfulness, untrustworthiness. And last but not least, John Bosan's Burning Brush, 2016. In a world bombarded with sound bites and flashing images, the painter states, a work of art of any kind should be strong enough to reveal some insight into the nature of our short journey through this reality. His burning brush might be a statement about the power of painting. It's almost biblical. In the next 100 years, I predict the art of Monson will expand 1,000-fold as artists of all stripes find their muse here. Where the authors of Monson, Maine history, 1822-1997, highlighted just 2 cultural figures in their survey, Seth Stewart and Bernice Abbott, the next record of the town's artistic activity, I submit, will rival other icons of Maine's artistic cultural landscape, like the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, or the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts. There's something happening here that is amazing and historical. As I wrote in the exhibition catalog, Monson's place on the art map of Maine and America is slate solid. On its 200th birthday, that's another reason to celebrate. Thank you. And I would be glad to take questions. I don't know what the time is here, but
Kind of free.
yeah, it's a few minutes before 3. Any thoughts? I was worried. Whenever you do a survey show like this, or create an anthology of something, as soon as you publish it or present it to the public, someone says, "Oh, where is so and so?" I was looking for. So I'm totally open to that. I'm ready to take it. I have to say, when I was up at the library earlier today, there's a beautiful Seth Stewart painting right in their little enclave there of the Wentworth House, I think, and part of Lake Huron.
Hotel.
It's just like I would have loved to have borrowed that another time. Yeah.
You didn't have any paintings of mine.
No, Glenn, I didn't know about that.
Glenn, you didn't offer you a 2 cats painting?
I did offer that. One of Alan's very first paintings was of my 2 cats,
Okay.
done on a W.T. Grant frame. They went out of business in the 60s, I think, or 70s.
I kind of remember that. It was like a store, right?
Yeah, downtown Bangor.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
Alan usually arm wrestled me to keep it private.
I think you could probably get big bucks for that. Yeah, here's your chance to retire.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. The only Seth Stewart's that I've ever seen are oils. Did he ever do any watercolors or other?
I've never seen any. They seem to be all oils. Yeah. And there's some wonderful, if you just Google around online, there's, I mentioned a couple of the other subjects. He covered the greater Monson area. And
It seems like every few years there's a Seth Stewart painting. I haven't seen this recently, but for quite a while, the antique auctioneers like Jim Julia would, every year they would have a Seth Stewart painting of the Mount Kineo house.
Right.
So that must have been one of his regular subjects.
Well, yeah, and going back to your talk this morning, Mount Kineo was one of the most popular spots, and it's such a dramatic view. You've painted Mount Kineo, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's such a great, such an unusual looking mountain, and it's a great subject. Yeah, but yeah, you have to keep an eye on those auction sites to see what comes along.
Some of Seth's early work was done with really poor materials. They just haven't held up very well. They're peeled and blistered. But at a certain point, he studied with a muralist that worked a lot in Piscataquis County. And he, after that interlude with that guy, I think he learned a lot. And he started working with much better materials. But maybe he just finally had a little bit of money or something.
I wonder if that was the Mr. Cameron that.
Well, I don't know, this is a guy that painted a lot of Legion halls and Grange halls, curtains and murals, and Masonic halls and things like that. I can't think of his name right now.
Are there any of those kind of murals in Monson?
I don't think so.
No.
Finn Hall has no, that's not a mural though, it's just a big Jerry Weymouth painting. Yeah.
I know that Stewart painted the curtain at Tarsall, but I don't know that it survived.
Yeah, a lot of those things didn't survive.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that was the hanging walls that they referenced there, related to.
No, I think that was wallpaper.
Do you think that was
correct? That's what they would call it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl. I just want to let everybody know we have a couple of refreshments over at the gallery. If you haven't been there yet, now's a good time to go over and take a look at everything in person.
Worked on a couple of sets. Chemicals and stuff still. I have a patch kit for the broken one, yeah.
So it used up the memories.
Actually,
I don't know how this thing works. It must be down.
I was in touch actually.
How do you stop it?
And